Avast ye hearties! Gather round to hear tale of grub that, well, perhaps wasn't so hearty. In their Caribbean heyday, pirates had to make do with what they had: preserved foods, meat from common animals, and, at least one time, their shoes.
Pity you can't eat pirates, really. But you'd probably taste of barnacles.
Caribbean pirates could only eat what was available to them. A nautical lifestyle only left so many options for filling a buccaneer's plate. The back-breaking labor involved in catching fish over the side of a galleon likely wasn't of interest to a pirate, but scooping up sea turtles along the shore was, as the animal provided an easy, plentiful, and fresh source of meat. Smithsonian notes, consuming turtle meat in 2022 is taboo in lots of places, but several hundred years ago, it was like chicken. It was so popular that according to the Tampa Bay Times, George Washington served it at a celebratory feast following the end of the American Revolution. Even if eating turtles had been socially unacceptable at the time, though, pirates were known for their take whatever, whenever attitude. A 17th century PETA-type group wouldn't have fazed them. But eating sea turtles wasn't an act of rebellion for pirates. It was practical. Since adult turtles weigh between 300 and 350 pounds on average, the aquatic animals made for an enormously bountiful food source, according to the National Ocean Service. Life at sea meant fresh bread was too easily susceptible to mold, so pirates, like many sailors of the day, had to settle for dry, hardtack biscuits instead. Smithsonian notes.
And look, it's food.
What is it?
It's better than hardtack and gruel, that's for sure.
According to the Texas Historical Commission, hardtack biscuits, though generally flavorless and often hard as a rock, were the preferred pantry bread for pirates because the cracker-like texture helped extend their shelf life. Of course, while its dried-out composition made it better suited to the sea than other breads, hardtack biscuits weren't entirely impervious to the elements. More often than not, the fairly filthy living conditions on a Caribbean pirate ship meant hardtack would end up overrun with weevil bugs over time, according to National Geographic. But a bug infestation may not have fazed a Caribbean pirate as much as we'd imagine. Laura Sooke Duncombe, author of Pirate Women, told the Tampa Bay Times in 2017 that pirates would often simply slam the biscuits to get rid of some of the bugs, and then eat any remaining bugs since they were a source of protein. Beef jerky is a quintessential road trip snack, so it makes sense that dried beef would be a favorite of sailors at sea. Of course, for Caribbean pirates, having long-lasting food on hand was about more than a pleasant experience. It literally meant the difference between life and death. The Tampa Bay Times notes that pirates prioritize food that would stay edible for long periods, including dried beef. Often sailing for weeks at a time without coming to shore, pirates understandably prioritized drier foods that remained edible over time. So salted and dried beef was a common staple. But if you're imagining Jack Links and Slim Jims, it wasn't quite the same thing. The dried beef found aboard pirate ships was often compared to tree bark. According to National Geographic, some sailors were known to repurpose their dried beef rations into a belt buckle. In other words, their dried beef was likely closer to hardtack from a pirate's point of view, a necessary evil for survival, rather than an enjoyable, salty snack. The one Caribbean pirate stereotype no one can question involves their intense love of alcohol, with rum holding a particularly important place in the life of a pirate. Wondrum confirms. But while rum was undeniably beloved, it was far from the exclusive beverage of choice for real-life pirates of the Caribbean. Any available alcohol was prized, because remaining inebriated by any means necessary was the preferred distraction from the harsh realities of sea life. During the 1700s and 1800s, National Geographic quotes 18th century merchant captain Nathaniel Uring as saying Caribbean pirates were a rude, drunken crew who enjoyed drinking, sometimes for an entire week. Smithsonian notes that rum was plentiful around the Caribbean and rarely went bad, which meant it was indeed just as popular with pirates as believed.
Yeah, it's just rum. I'm not bored. I'm a pirate.
The need for preservation techniques for food products has drastically diminished since the advent of refrigeration, but Caribbean pirates certainly didn't have modern appliances, so any way to reduce the risk of spoilage was key to survival. So Smithsonian notes that when pirates were able to obtain meat and vegetables, they often did what they had to do to extend the shelf life, including pickling them. It wasn't just pirates that were prone to prefer pickled food products during the 17th and 18th centuries. According to the book Pirates of the Americas by David Marley, pickling was one of the few food preservation techniques available to people of that era. So you'd likely find pickled food in home pantries as well as the lower decks of pirate ships. Once again, pragmatism was the key factor. Most food pirates ate came out of necessity with little regard to flavor. But on occasion, pirates were able to feast on some truly intriguing selections. And according to National Geographic, nothing may top the favored stew of Caribbean pirates, a jumbled assembly of various foods known as salmagundi. Pirates' version of salmagundi was made with virtually anything at their disposal, and it involved simmering a host of foods in a single pot filled with wine and spices. Among the common ingredients in pirate salmagundi were beef, fish, crab, cabbage, pigeon, and hard-boiled eggs, according to a pair of recipes from the New England Pirate Museum. Part of the reason for the dish's popularity, according to the book Pirates of the Americas, was that all crew members were expected to equally contribute and share pots of salmagundi, fostering a deeper bond on board. The dish was so beloved among Caribbean pirates that the legendary Black Bart was actually dining on salmagundi the day of his capture and death. Caribbean pirates actually get the credit for introducing mangoes to the American palate. WUSF Public Media reports that they're the ones who first brought the tropical fruit to Florida in the 1700s.
Smell it, sweet as an angel's kiss. Dry land, mate. Coconuts, mangoes.
Mangoes weren't just a favorite of Caribbean pirates for their sweet, creamy flavor, though. As history professor Kevin P. McDonald told the Tampa Bay Times in 2017, mangoes were likely a key item for battling scurvy, a well-known disease among 17th and 18th century sailors, caused by vitamin C deficiency. Since scurvy is believed to have killed an estimated 2 million sailors during that time period, the presence of mangoes on Caribbean pirate ships could have literally saved their lives, the U.S. Naval Institute explains. Since few things in life taste better than fresh fruit, we're sure Caribbean pirates ate plenty of mangoes raw. But they also made use of the fruit in cooked dishes as well. A salmagundi recipe that was included in the book Pirates of the Americas listed mangoes among a number of other ingredients. Contrary to popular belief, pirates' desire for debauchery was only part of the reason they consumed so much alcohol. Unlike fresh water, which over time would become an algae-infested ooze, alcohol wouldn't spoil, which helped make beer a favorite beverage of Caribbean pirates, Smithsonian explains. Since alcohol was always on the menu, it's not hard to see why beer would have been a better day-to-day option for many Caribbean pirates than liquors. Beer contains far less alcohol than rum and other liquor. After all, meaning a pirate crew slugging beer would have an easier time completing their work than one throwing back shots of the hard stuff. While beer was undoubtedly a favorite beverage of Caribbean pirates, the lower alcohol content was actually a liability for some, especially captains who wanted to keep their crews in line. National Geographic notes that famed pirate Blackbeard said beer alone just wasn't enough to ensure his crew continued following orders. He needed the strong stuff to prevent mutiny. Before you start judging, know this: the notion of eating a pigeon isn't entirely unheard of even today. The fine dining menu staple squab is a common type of pigeon. And again, pirates sailing in the Caribbean didn't have a huge host of options available to them. They had to eat what they could find, and pigeons were plentiful. National Geographic notes that one of the main ingredients listed in recipes for the common pirate dish salmagundi was indeed chopped pigeon. So were pirates often catching pigeons and roasting them? Well, that's harder to say. There's evidence of the birds being part of a number of recipes for stews and other dishes, but not as much to indicate they were munching on them like chicken. History professor Kevin P. McDonald told the Tampa Bay Times in 2017 that he wasn't aware of any pigeon-specific preferences, but he also noted that the pirates were likely partial to eating any bird that they could hunt, except parrots, of course.
Don't eat me!
I'm not gonna eat you.
It's not exactly news to say water is a necessary part of any diet, and pirates sailing the tropics were certainly aware that they needed water to survive. But Wondrum explains that the wooden casks they used to store fresh water were prone to internal seepage, which left only slimy, algae-infested water on board. This, quite frankly, was likely the main underlying cause for Caribbean pirates' preference for alcoholic drinks over water. When your options for a drink are rum, beer, or water swimming with toxic green algae, the latter isn't a particularly appealing option. But the pirates on these ships couldn't entirely avoid the algae water. After all, the human body can only survive up to 3 days without water. So how did they stomach it? The pirates would work around the issue by mixing some sort of alcohol with the water before drinking it, hoping that the alcohol would render the tainted water safe. And given that most pirates of the period didn't die of thirst or poisoning from algae toxins, it seems like it worked. Who doesn't love a mixed drink? Or an alcoholic punch? Sure, pirates of the time drank plenty of straight rum and beer, but they also quite literally spiced things up every once in a while. Wondrum notes that one of the most popular beverages consumed by pirates as they made their way from Caribbean isle to isle was bumbo, a spiced liquid concoction including water, sugar, nutmeg, and of course, rum. Compared to other common components of a Caribbean pirate's diet, bumbo actually sounds pretty tasty. The combination of ingredients makes bumbo sound like a less rich holiday season companion to eggnog. Culture Map Houston even suggests that it could work well as a pirate-themed alternative to the creamy cocktail. All things considered, we're not entirely sure why bumbo hasn't stood the test of time or remained a popular party drink through the centuries. But when we're looking for a lighter, rum-centric beverage this December, we think we'll skip apple cider and mix ourselves a classic pirate favorite, bumbo, instead. As we've probably made clear by now, edible food could be pretty scarce on pirate ships, especially after months sailing the seas. Pirates had to eat whatever they could get their hands on, and sometimes things got pretty dire. The Tampa Bay Times reports that in one instance, a pirate crew resorted to eating leather bags and shoes to stave off death. It's true that describing a piece of meat as being like shoe leather is not a compliment, and eating a shoe is something a dog is much more likely to do than a person.
Eat his shoe. Come on. Eat his shoe. Yum, 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 yum.
But if you have no other options, leather is at least closer to food than other things. It's animal hide after all, and some leather products are actually safe to eat. Also, back in 1670, when the crew of famous 17th century pirate Henry Morgan was desperate enough to literally shred and fry their leather bags, far fewer chemical, potentially poisonous preservatives were used in making leather, National Geographic notes. In other words, it may not have been tasty, but it wasn't necessarily deadly either. We weren't able to find any specific details about how the leather-eating crew members fared after their unusual meal, but it seems as though their desperate gambit paid off. According to Britannica, the Welsh-born Morgan lived nearly another 2 decades after his crew's fateful ingestion of their leather accessories.